Lecture 11, Confucian Schools and Reconciliation with Daoism. As with all deep thinkers, Confucius's thought was further developed. Two main ways by which Confucianism developed was regarding human nature. Mencius, he lived from 327 to 289 BC, and his school interpreted Confucian thought in an optimistic manner, especially with respect to human nature. For this reason, Mencius does not stress the role of law as much as Shunxi, who lived from 300 to 210 BC, and his more legalistic Confucian school does. Another way by which Confucianism developed was not by forming a new school, but rather by interacting with Daoism, a philosophical approach that is very different from Confucianism. Mencius and human nature. I'm going to quote from Mencius. Now, if anyone were suddenly to see a child about to fall into a well, his mind would be filled with alarm, distress, pity, and compassion. That he would react accordingly is not because he would hope to use the opportunity to ingratiate himself with the child's parents, nor because he would hate the adverse reputation that could come from not reacting accordingly. From this it may be seen that one who lacks a mind that feels pity and compassion would not be human. One who lacks a mind that feels shame and aversion would not be human. One who lacks a mind that feels modesty and compliance would not be human. And one who lacks a mind that knows right and wrong would not be human. End of quote. Mencius continues by identifying four good impulses as natural, as having four limbs. If these impulses are unimpeded, then good actions will result, or sprout forth as a flower sprouts from a bud. The first impulse is pity and compassion. The second impulse is shame and aversion. The third impulse is modesty and compliance. And the fourth impulse is the sense of right and wrong. Pity and compassion flowers into humanness, Ren, as his story about the child falling into a well illustrates. Shame and aversion blossoms into rightness, Yi. Modesty and compliance grows into conformity to customs, propriety, or li, and the sense of right and wrong is expressed by wisdom, Ji. According to Mencius, these impulses and fruits that define human nature are present in every human being. He states, the goodness of human nature is like the downward course of water. There's no human being lacking in the tendency to do good, just as there is no water lacking in the tendency to flow downward. End of quote. To the objection that there are countless examples of people acting in ways contrary to his proposed natural feelings of compassion and modesty, Mencius argues that only when people are forced to do something contrary to the good impulses are bad actions done. Again, with reference to water, he explains, quote, by striking water and splashing it, you may cause it to go over your head, and by damming and channeling it, you may force it to flow uphill. But is this the nature of water? If it is force that makes this happen, while people can be made to do what is not good, what happens to their nature is like this. This violence, further explains Mencius, may be defined circumstances he calls times of adversity. Adverse circumstances cause people to go against their natural tendencies to do good and avoid evil. Since, and I quote, in years of abundance, most of the young people have the wherewithal to be good, while in years of adversity, most of them become violent. This is not a matter of difference in native capacity sent down by heaven, but rather of what overwhelms their minds. End of quote. Mencius also defines violence not merely by circumstances, but also by choice, where people choose, quote, to do violence to themselves, end of quote. He asserts, quote, to deny propriety and rightness in one's speech is what is called doing violence to oneself. Mencius does not explain why people have a tendency to do violence to themselves in order to do evil rather than good. The Catholic explanation is that human beings are born with original sin that, even after baptism, leaves human nature with an inclination to evil that is called concupiscence. End of quote. This inclination does not mean, however, that human nature is intrinsically evil. Instead, the essential goodness of human nature is only wounded and deprived of original holiness and justice. along with its natural inclination to goodness, human nature, according to the Catholic Church, is subject to ignorance, suffering, and death. And due to that woundedness in our nature, we need grace in order to be good. We need to rely on God. We now move to Shunxi and human nature. Contrary to Mencius, the Chinese Confucian scholar Shunxi held that human nature is naturally inclined to evil and not to good. According to Shunxi, quote, "It is plain that human nature is evil and that any good in humans is acquired by conscious exertion." End of quote. Being polite, well-mannered, such as a, quote, "a son's deference to his father and a younger brother to his older brother," Shunxi asserts, contradicts the true feelings inherent in his man's inborn nature. End of quote. Unlike Mencius, who describes human nature like peaceful water that naturally flows into good actions, Shunxi compares human nature to a warped board. He states, "A straight board does not first need the press frame to be straight. It is straight by nature. But a warped board must first await application of the press frame, steam to soften it, and force to bend it in shape before it can be made straight. This is because by nature it is not straight." End of quote. In order for the board representing evil human nature to be straight and, consequently, by definition good, Shunxi believes that a government of wise kings must impose morality and ritual on those below them. For this reason, Shunxi stresses the importance of law significantly more than Mencius does. If law is not imposed in a forceful manner, argues Shunxi, then the supposedly most natural tendencies of human beings of greed, fighting, and unrestrained passion will be expressed. According to Catholicism, the violent, greedy, and unrestrained tendencies within human beings are not what is most essential to them. Neither original sin nor personal sin has erased men and women being made in the image and likeness of God, who is good, all-loving, and truthful. Since the goodness of human nature has been wounded by both original sin and by personal sins, men and women cannot, holds the Catholic Church, act fully in accordance with their essentially good natures. In order to do so, their intellects and will must, along with desires and emotions, cooperate with supernatural grace. Morality, thus understood, is not simply a matter of following emotions, as Mencius seems to indicate, or following the dictates of the will that correspond to law imposed upon it externally, as Shunxi implies. Another critical difference between Catholicism and Confucianism of both Mencius and Shunxi is the distinction the Catholic tradition makes between guilt and shame. As explained by Peter Kraft, relying on St. Thomas Aquinas, in Catholicism, quote, "Shame is social, being seen and disapproved by others. Guilt is individual, being seen and disapproved by God and your own conscience." End of quote. This distinction is made since, unlike Confucianism, that is a socially based ethics that may or may not acknowledge God's presence, in Catholicism, God is central. Confucianism, Mencius, and Daoism. During China's warring states and Qin dynasty, Shunxi's form of Confucianism dominated China. This meant that during these times, the tendencies of human nature were automatically assumed as suspect and inclined to disorder, violence, and irrational behavior that could, if unchecked, lead to political instability. For this reason, law and harsh punishment, in particular in the Qin dynasty, for those who broke laws, were stressed. The long-standing Han dynasty lasted from 206 to 206 BC to 220 AD, that followed the short-lived Qin dynasty, embraced Mencius and his assumptions that since human nature is essentially good, stressing law can be counterproductive. Mencius' form of Confucianism almost definitively replaced Shunxi's pessimistic Confucianism after the Han dynasty ended, in part due to the teaching of the Chinese man Ji Hong. He lived from 283 to 343 AD. Ji Hong not only took a positive approach to Confucianism, in accordance with Mencius' interpretation, but also integrated Confucian teaching with Taoist belief in spontaneity, naturalism, individualism, and nonconformity. The last characteristic of nonconformity may seem as completely incompatible with the repeated teachings of Confucius on conforming to societal norms. In his writings, Ji Hong dismisses this apparent contradiction by demonstrating how it is possible to be inwardly Taoist and outwardly, that is, in public, Confucian. As observed by the scholar Grant Hardy, current Asian cultures influenced by a blend of Confucianism and Taoist Buddhism, especially China, strongly value Confucian elements of filial piety, paternalism, strong families, hierarchy, communities, conformity to societal norms, consensus, ritual, deference, along with the more Taoist Buddhist values of harmony, love of nature, and spontaneity within intimate settings. The Western appreciation of individual autonomy, consequently, is significantly less valued in such Asian countries, which understands a person's identity as derived from their community relationships. Finally, the common but not universal Western way of directly stating one's faults and feelings is not, explained Hardy, pronounced in Asian countries, whose cultures are steeped in Confucianism and Taoist Buddhism. These Asian countries have been profoundly influenced by Confucian understanding of ritual, deference, and hierarchy, along with the Taoist Buddhist value of harmony. In relating his experience as a Westerner of a Chinese-Asian view, strongly influenced by Confucianism and Taoism, Grant states this, I quote, "Harder to understand were the times when we made appointments to see people, and then were deliberately not at home when we came back at the specified day and hour. They hadn't really wanted to continue the conversation, but it would have been rude to say so directly. That would have made us lose face, and that's a really important concept that has to do with a person's dignity and social status and public persona. Sometimes when we'd knock on a door and people would open it and see us and then say, 'Oh, please, won't you come in,' even as they were shutting the door, they have to say, 'Come in,' even if they don't really want to see you. It's not just what's said, but it's how it's said. China is a land of polite, face-saving excuses. Eventually, I learned to do this as well. Once I forgot to go to an appointment, and when I asked my culturally savvy associate what we should do, he said, 'We're going to tell them we got sick.' 'That's not true,' I said. He explained, 'If we tell them we got sick, they'll figure that we forgot. If we tell them we forgot, they'll suspect we didn't want to talk to them at all.' 'Ah,' I said. God bless."